Hello, and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's podcast is number 1471. The topic is mindset, and the title is, What's Your Win? Recently, I had a good kind of conversation with a client. We were talking through our online journal that I have all my online clients use. It's a Google Doc, and then they write in questions, comments. I write in questions and comments. I always try to respond at least once a week. I usually try to do it every 3 to 5 days. But it's fun because often we get into good conversations that go beyond just, basic nutrition and training things. I wanted to share this recent conversation that was kind of a blend of a couple people, but I think this is something that other people might struggle with, and I thought it would be good to touch base on. So I had a client who's been struggling with their emotional mental health towards themselves in regards to their nutrition choices. So in their nutrition program, they're supposed to be tracking calories per day, and there's like a range they have for training days, a range of calories for non-training days. They have a protein minimum that we want to hit, and then they have a distribution goal. Our goal is to make sure we don't just get too busy and don't eat anything all day and then eat everything at night. So we want to kind of distribute things more equally. So this client is following a thirds distribution. So if we divide the day into every 5 to 6 hours of being awake, you could say that that's like a third of each day, like part of the day. So the first 5 to 6 hours of being awake is the first third of the day. And she would aim for a third of her calories and protein. Then, in the second 5 to 6 hours of being awake is the second third of the day. And she would again eat for a third of her calories and protein. Then the final third of the day, the final 5, 6, 7 hours or whatever, she's going to eat the final 1/3 of her calories and protein. So really good distribution. And that is a really great way to eat. If most people follow just those three things, they're going to be extremely happy with the way they look and the way they feel. The next thing was she was doing very well with that. She was getting between like about 10 to 12 days out of every 14 days, 100% on point with those things. So about 5 to 6 days a week, calories were perfect, protein was perfect, distribution was perfect. And then maybe once or twice a week, maybe the distribution was a little off because she went on a date night or she visited family, and so the calories in the evening were a little higher than the daytime. So just small variations or small deviations. So we then started to talk about macronutrient choice. So in each meal there's protein we want to be accountable to, or at least each third of the day. Then we would say, okay, well, what's going to give me energy? That would be our carbs and our fats. In general, if you're very active, it's better to eat carbohydrates because they digest quickly and they're available quickly. If you're not as active, it's better to eat fats because they digest slower. So the energy kind of distributes out into the bloodstream a little bit slower, which matches since you're low activity, and it kind of elongates out the digestion so there's not so much of a peak in the bloodstream, so you'd have less excess nutrients in the bloodstream following that meal. So it's small, subtle thing, but it's definitely something that's worth looking at. If the person's already doing the first three things so well, why not look at the next thing? And that's what the client had asked me. So they were doing the first three, and they're like, I'm doing great. What's next? And I was like, well, I said, you don't really need what's next, but here's what it is. So that way you would know. So like kind of educational aspect. They started focusing on carbs versus fats, and unfortunately, they then started getting discouraged. What was happening was they had a really good routine, and they were feeling pretty automatic with food choices, schedules, everything felt really good. Normal chaos of life, but it was the normal good routine. They then had to travel. They got out of their routine, and they're struggling to get back into their routine while also trying to focus on this extra component. Now, this was not what I recommended. So when they came back from traveling, I said, hey, don't worry about the carbs versus fats. Just focus on your calories first, get those under wraps, and then work down the list, protein distribution, then worry about carbs and fats. Well, like all of us, myself included, they tried to do everything at once. And what do you know? That didn't work out. So she's been struggling to get all areas back in line. So now she's only been accurate about 8, 9, maybe 10 days out of 14. And that carb versus fats choice is kind of like 50-50. So she feels like she's not doing really well. She's going to backslide and lose all of her gains and, blah, 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 and it's the end of the world. That kind of mindset. Now, I understand that mindset because I have that myself. I miss one day of working out and I feel fat and disgusting. So I understand it. I do. So it was good for us to get to talk through that because we got to put some perspective around it. One of the things we talked about, and this is something that I focus on to help keep myself in check mentally, is my health, like that aspect of my life related to nutrition and training, is only a part of my life. I have relationships, I have work, I have finances, I have the regular crap of life. If I have to go do a dentist appointment, things like that. There's a lot of stuff that we're balancing in our life, a lot of priorities other than our nutrition and our training. Now, those things have tons of merit, they absolutely should be balanced and created equal. When you don't let them feel equal and you hyper-focus on nutrition and training, you're going to live an imbalanced life and that'll eventually implode on you. I've seen it happen a bajillion times. It's not good long term. So you want to find a sustainable way of eating and training that doesn't negatively impact the highest quality relationships that you want, your work quality, your life role. So this client, for example, is a stay-at-home mom. She homeschools her kids. That's her job. So she might say, well, I don't have a job. Yeah, you do. You have a life role. You have something that you're accountable to do every day. That is something that you have to balance. Then we have, like we said, finances and other things. So what I was kind of talking through her is on her journal, we were talking about okay, well, in the moments that you have missed and in the meals that weren't quite lined up the way you wanted, why? What happened? Let's talk through it. Let's look at each meal for the last week and the ones that you can remember. Let's talk about what happened. Why did we choose what we chose? What got in the way? What was the obstacle? And I told her, I said, what we're looking to do is we're not looking at this saying, how many ways have you messed up? We're looking at this saying, is there anything repetitive? Was there anything predictable? Was there anything we could prepare for if it were to happen again? So we went through that, and it was really cool to see. A lot of the stuff was things that she wouldn't have been able to predict. One time, she just ate a piece of cake because she wanted the piece of cake, and she was around a piece of cake. Totally fine. Not the end of the world. So sometimes we make bad choices on purpose. And then often, we just have life thrown at us, and we have to make reactive choices. And that's not always the best choice when we have a chance to look at it later. But there's also times when you made a good choice, and the good choice happened to be not the best choice for nutrition. What do I mean by that? Well, when you have two priorities that conflict. So if you're, her son got sick one day and she had to take him into the hospital to see if he was okay and get checked out. Well, that meant that she missed her daytime meal. She had to eat something kind of crappy on the way home from the hospital just to get some calories in. So she was super bummed that she lost that whole day. Well, she didn't. Her calories were actually still on point because she still got some food in. Her protein was 5 grams under our minimum, which isn't even significantly low. So she actually still did a good job that day. But she didn't get the carbs versus fats right, and she didn't get the distribution right. So she's like, crap, I feel bad. I really messed that day up. And I was like, why would you feel bad that you took care of your son? You took care of your son. That definitely takes priority over eating the right meal, the perfect foods. So I was like, the problem is you were faced with, there were kind of like two good things. You could have had this good meal, or you could have taken care of your son. I'm glad you chose to take care of your son. But those were choices between two good things. So sometimes we have to make a good decision, and then we're just bummed about what we missed out or what the causes of that good decision are. Doesn't mean we made a bad decision. It was a good decision, but there are consequences to even good decisions. So I had her listen to podcast number 359. It's a mindset podcast titled Dealing with the Guilt of Good Decisions. Really good podcast. If you want to find older podcasts, you can go to our website, www.brutalirongym.com, and I have a link and instructions there on how to find our older podcasts. So podcast 359 talks about the guilt of good decisions. She made the right decision, but now she's feeling bad about it. Don't do that. Remind yourself that it was the right decision. Just because there are negative consequences to it doesn't mean it was a bad decision. It's just that's the result of decisions. If I decide one thing, it means I'm missing out on another thing. Now, if I'm missing out on something that's really good, remember that you chose the better thing. So you made a good choice. Remind yourself that it was a good choice. Now, we talked a lot through that. Then we also talked that health stuff, when it comes to nutrition, when it comes to training, it's almost never ending. So once you think you're doing everything right, there's a next step to it. And that can be very overwhelming. That can be very challenging. But it's like, okay, well, if I'm tracking my calories, I'm tracking my protein, I'm tracking my distribution. She was like, what's next? And I said, well, carbs and fats. Okay, well, what could possibly be next after that? Well, there's actually digestion rates of proteins. So you would want to actually eat proteins that digest very quickly at the beginning of the day to try to get protein in your bloodstream immediately. But you'd want to eat proteins that digest slowly before you go to bed, because you want that protein to be released slowly in the bloodstream so it can be used kind of throughout the night. So there's actually digestion rates of proteins. There's also different digestion rates of carbs within carbs themselves, different digestion rates of fats within fats themselves. So it's never ending. I promise you. You could go down a rabbit hole, and it's never ending. So once you think you're doing it right, there would always be a next step. So you need to decide what you can do sustainably. Now, there are seasons of life where you might push harder and try more aggressive things, but that can't be sustained, so you have to understand that you have to pull back out of those. So you need to define for yourself, what is your win? What does success look like for you? If everything seems overwhelming and never ending, you have to define for yourself where your success point is. And once decided, you have to kind of work to maintain it, and then you can look at trying to improve it over time. So I have another client who's going through major struggles in life, like huge family health issues and other things going on. So she was saying that she was feeling overwhelmed, kind of like feeling like she's just failing at everything. And I was like, no, don't worry about that. You're taking care of priorities outside of nutrition and training that do need addressed. They do need attended to. So let's talk about what are the minimums. What's the minimums of things that we can focus on? So track your calories or keep a rough estimate of your calories every day. As long as you're not under eating, because that's what most people do when they stress out. As long as you're not under eating, you're going to be maintaining fat loss and you're doing well. But also, obviously, don't overeat. But mostly make sure you eat enough. So just pay attention to your calories. If you're getting within your calories right, then regardless of what else happens nutritionally and training-wise that day, you're at least going to maintain your current status, if not make ever so small progress. Small. I said, but if you can also pay attention to protein. That would be kind of like step number 2. Out of every meal I'm having, or when I eat food, I would say, what's giving me protein in this meal? And if you pay attention to that, it's going to make sure your protein balance, your distribution of protein within your calories is correct. And that's going to help limit and control excess carbs and fats, which helps, again, with fat loss and preventing fat storage. So I said, that's really good. Now, if you can do those things, that's amazing. But also, then the next thing would be is, can I be active that day? Can I go for a 10-minute walk above and beyond what my normal activity was for the day? Can I set a timer and do some 5 minutes of squats and reverse lunges? Maybe you can get to the gym that day. Maybe you actually have a break in the day and you can get to the gym and just kind of put on your headphones and zone out. I said, that's the top 3. If you want a 4th, because this is the type of person who wants a 4th, which is good, very detailed. I said, worry about distribution. Focus on distribution. So make sure, if you can, control it. Don't eat all your calories at the end of the day. Try to eat a little bit during the day, as much as you can, to try to make sure it's not all piled in at the end of the day. So I said, these are the things we can focus on. If you notice, I didn't talk about whether they should have, white rice or, brown rice or white bread or wheat bread. Like, the food choices don't really matter much. Just get within your calories, your protein, be active if you can, and try not to eat everything at the end of the day. If you're doing those things, you're moving forward. You're progressing. It might not feel like the detailed efforts that you did before, but you got a lot of stuff going on right now, and you need to give your attention and focus to those things. So we want our nutrition and training efforts to be minimums, not zeros. Minimums, at least moving forward to some degree. But let's just make it a little bit easier right now. So that's something that we all can kind of think of and focus on. If you're consistently kind of feeling overwhelmed, this is something you can do to help calm some of the anxiety, some of the stress, some of the worry, is try to define for yourself what's your win. Now, we can do that within each area of life. So you can think about, like, what's my win for maybe spiritual life? If you have a spiritual aspect to your life, what's a daily minimum or weekly minimum that you think is a good habit to hold on to, and that helps at least sustain the baseline of your spiritual life? Then we have self-care. What's a daily thing, a weekly thing that you can do to maintain the baseline of self-care? We have relationships. You have work or your role in life, finances, and then just other crap. The goal is to work to be consistent with basics before you worry about the details. If you're getting the basics, the minimums in, then no matter what happens, you know you're at least sustaining what you have, right? So it's so helpful to know that. It's so helpful to think that through and actually kind of write them down or plan them out or make them crystal clear in regards to the steps and actions that you should take. There's another old podcast 19. So way the hell back when, podcast 19. It was a mindset podcast titled Aim Low. Again, if you want to listen to that, you can check out our old podcast by just going to our website, and there's directions there. But it was in reference to a concept by Jordan Peterson, who wrote a book. He actually wrote two really good ones that I like. The first book was 10 Rules of Life, I think it's 10 Rules of Life or 10 Rules to Live By. Great book, really fun. I love that kind of stuff. And one of the things he talked about was the concept of aiming low. So when you want to be consistent with something, when you want to form a new habit, aim low. Start with something that feels borderline insulting. And what I mean by that is, if somebody said, well, can you do this every day? You're like, oh, yeah, of course. Like, whatever. Yeah, I can do more than that. It's like, no. Start at that. So if you think of, in the world of nutrition, what's the minimum you can do every day? Something that, if somebody say, can you do this every day? And you're like, that's almost insulting that you would think I can't do that. Start with that. So start with something that insults yourself. That's crazy advice, but it's excellent because you're going to then be consistent with it, or at least not be insanely overwhelmed by trying to take on something more aggressive. So you might do it for 2 weeks. Say try to do it for 14 days. If you can be consistent 10 out of 14 days, then you did well, take the next step. But in the first 14 days, you're like, oh crap, that turned out to be a lot harder than I thought. Well, then it's great that you aimed low, so it's a lower level of problem to solve than what you would have started with. So aim low. Start with something that feels insulting. Can you do 10 squats a day? I kid you not that if you set that goal for the next 14 days, you won't do it. 10 bodyweight squats a day. Do it for the next 14 days. It'll be more effort than you thought it would be, and you probably won't even make all 14 days. That sounds insulting, but it's just human nature. You don't currently do 10 bodyweight squats a day. So for you to start to remember to do that, force yourself to do it while balancing all the other crazy crap you're doing in your life, you'd be surprised that you would actually have to put effort into doing 10 bodyweight squats every single day. So just aim for something low. Aim low. Aim with something that insults you. Try to be consistent for 10 out of 14 days. If you are, then try to take the next step. But that's how you can feel more mentally comfortable with what you're doing, is deciding for yourself what's your win. If I'm doing X, then I'm doing okay. If I can do more than X, great. But as long as I'm doing X, I'm okay. I don't have to beat myself up. I don't have to feel like a loser. As long as I'm doing X, I'm okay. You want to define those for yourself. Okay. When it comes to nutrition, check out podcast 1232. It's our nutrition podcast titled Start Here. It actually literally tells you the steps that you should look into. So this is number 1, this is number 2, so you know what to do. And then for training, just anything, just freaking move, do something. Whether it's 10 bodyweight squats a day, or if you want to learn more about bodyweight training, we have podcast 266. It's a training podcast titled Bodyweight Training. We have podcast 274. It's a training podcast titled How to Achieve Total Fitness in a 30-Minute Workout. So if you can get to the gym, but even if it's only 30 minutes, that's fine. And then we have podcast 1010, so 1010, is a training podcast titled Training Program Creation Example. And I actually talk through the steps I use to create a full training program. So there's pretty good complexity within all that. So this will help a lot. If you're struggling with thinking you're a piece of crap and you're a loser and you're falling behind and everything, you're not. You're probably doing a hell of a lot better than you think you are. Just define what your minimums are so that way you know what to compare yourself to. It'll hold you accountable to the minimums to make sure you're doing them, and then you can just feel like a freaking awesome badass on the days you can go above that minimum. Great. Well, if you want any help or you need anything, just reach out or email us, brutalirongym@gmail.com. I'd always be happy to help. Also, hopefully you haven't tuned me off just yet. I do have a favor to ask. Yes, now you're going to tune me off. But we're updating our website. I want to start producing more free programming and other content on the website. Part of that is I want to advertise the podcast and the benefits it can have to people. So that way it encourages people who are new to the website, new to the podcast, to actually check out the podcast. If you don't mind, if the podcast has been helpful to you, just write a quick, few sentences or write a long story, whatever you want. Just saying that the podcast was helpful. Include your first name and where you're from, and then email that to me at brutalirongym@gmail.com. I would like to feature some feedback on the website to encourage people to listen to the podcast. So if you don't mind doing that, if this podcast has been helpful to you, I would appreciate that very, very much. Again, just a quick little blurb about how the podcast has been helpful or what you like about the podcast, your name, and then where you're from. And then email that to brutalirongym@gmail.com. Well, thank you if you participate in that, and I really do appreciate it. Okay, well, if you like the podcast, please share it. That helps. Just share it to the world, and so we can help more people. Thank you to the people who donate to support the podcast financially. The podcast is well over $1,000 a year. I give an hour to it every day, and we want to keep it for free, so I appreciate the donations. It helps pay for some of that cost. If you want to donate, you can do so on our website, www.brutalirongym.com. There's an option there for a one-time donation, monthly donation, yearly donation, even just $5 a month. It does go a long way. If you like the information we share in our podcast, you would definitely like the information we share in our social media. We share different and new stuff on there almost daily. Instagram is definitely the place I would go to. It's then shared to Facebook and Twitter from Instagram. YouTube, I'll do some videos every now and then. But Instagram is definitely the one I go to. So it's under the name Brutal Iron Gym. Then if you have any questions, feedback, suggestions, anything that you want to know, let us know at our email, brutalirongym@gmail.com. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.